I hauled my duffel bag up the narrow metal stairs, pausing twice to catch my breath. After months of unemployment in Boise, this job was exactly what I needed. Complete isolation in the Bitterroot National Forest. The climb was worth it when I reached the top of the fire lookout tower. 60 feet above the forest floor, I stood on the observation deck and took in my first panoramic view. Dense pine and fir trees stretched in every direction, rolling toward distant mountains that cut jagged lines against the blue sky. The tower creaked in the wind as I unlocked the door to the observation room. Home, sweet home for the next few months. I dropped my bag on the wooden floor and walked a complete circle around the room, taking in every detail. The space was small but practical. A single bed pushed against one wall, a desk with radio equipment, shelves stocked with basic kitchen supplies, and windows on all sides offering uninterrupted views of the wilderness. "Not bad," I said to the empty room. My voice sounded strange after hours of silence during the drive up. I unpacked methodically, placing clothes in the small dresser, arranging toiletries on the narrow bathroom shelf, and setting up my laptop on the desk. The previous lookout had left 3 weeks ago, according to my briefing, but the place was surprisingly clean. I ran my finger along the windowsill. No dust. Someone had prepared the tower for my arrival. The kitchen area consisted of a mini fridge, a 2-burner propane stove, and a sink with a hand pump. I stocked the cabinet with the non-perishables I'd brought, organizing everything by meal type. My time in construction had taught me that organization makes small spaces more livable. While setting up the radio equipment according to the manual, I noticed something wedged behind the unit. I pulled out a spiral notebook with a faded blue cover. Flipping it open, I found pages filled with handwriting that grew increasingly erratic toward the end. Day 23. Heard it again last night. One entry read in tight, controlled script. I turned a few more pages. Day 31. The suit man was closer today. The writing became more frantic, with deeper pen impressions on the paper. Day 40. Laura's rules aren't enough anymore. I snorted and closed the notebook. Some people weren't cut out for isolation. The previous lookout had clearly gone a bit stir-crazy out here alone. I tucked the notebook into the desk drawer, an amusing souvenir of someone who couldn't handle the solitude I was specifically seeking. The afternoon passed quickly as I familiarized myself with my responsibilities. I studied the maps marked with grid references, practiced using the fire finder, a circular table with sighting mechanisms to pinpoint smoke locations, and read through the standardized radio protocols. The job itself wasn't complicated. Watch for smoke, report accurately, and maintain the equipment. Perfect for someone who needed space from the world. As evening approached, I followed procedure and made my first check-in call. Bitterroot North Tower to base. Reporting arrival and setup complete, over. The radio crackled before a woman's voice responded. Base to Bitterroot North confirmed. This is Laura Garcia. All equipment functioning correctly? Affirmative, I replied. Everything's in working order. Good. Laura's voice sounded distracted, with muffled paper shuffling in the background. I'll send some important information to your email soon. Make sure you read it thoroughly. Anything I should know right away? A pause hung on the line before she answered. No, just pay attention to details. The job requires careful observation. That's why you hired me, I said, trying to inject some friendliness into the conversation. Indeed. Check in again tomorrow morning. Base out. The abrupt end to our conversation left me shrugging at the radio. My new boss wasn't much for small talk, which suited me fine. I prepared a simple dinner of pasta with canned sauce. Nothing fancy, but satisfying after the long day. With my plate balanced on my knee, I sat on the observation deck and watched the sunset transform the forest. Golden light spilled through the trees, warming the weathered wood of the deck railing. The breeze carried the scent of pine and earth, clean and sharp. This was exactly what I wanted after the past 8 months of failed job interviews and dwindling bank accounts. No office politics, no rejections, no awkward explanations about the construction company layoffs. Just me, the forest, and a straightforward purpose. I finished eating as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in deepening shades of orange and purple. Stars began appearing overhead, far brighter than anything visible in the city. The vastness of the night sky made me feel small in a comforting way. My problems insignificant against the backdrop of this ancient forest and endless sky. The observation room glowed warmly when I went back inside. I made a final check of all equipment, jotted down weather observations in the official log, and prepared for my first night in the tower. The metal frame of the bed creaked as I sat down to remove my boots. Outside, darkness settled completely over the forest, transforming the windows into black mirrors that reflected the interior light. I switched off the main lamp, leaving only the small reading light above the bed. In the sudden quiet, the tower's slight movements in the wind became more noticeable. Gentle swaying and occasional creaks that would become the soundtrack of my nights here. Tomorrow, I'd establish a proper routine. For now, I was content knowing I'd found exactly the escape I needed. As I settled into bed with a paperback, I felt more at peace than I had in months. The isolation others feared was exactly what I had been looking for. I set my paperback aside after finishing another chapter, my eyelids growing heavy. The soft glow of the reading light created a small circle of warmth in the observation room. I just reached over to switch it off when a notification sound from my laptop broke the silence. A new email at 11:47 p.m. seemed odd. The isolation of the tower magnified small interruptions, making the electronic ping feel almost intrusive in the night quiet. With a sigh, I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and padded across the wooden floor to the desk. The subject line blazed across my screen. Critical. Read immediately. Sender, Laura Garcia. I clicked it open, suddenly wide awake. The email contained 6 numbered rules with no introduction or explanation. 1. Maintain regular radio check-ins at scheduled times. 2. Never leave the tower at night for any reason. 3. If you see someone staring at the tower, do not wave, signal, or acknowledge them in any way. 4. Do not respond to anyone requesting help or assistance, regardless of how desperate they appear. 5. Never invite anyone into the tower under any circumstances. 6. If rules 1 to 5 are followed exactly, you will remain safe. Breaking any rule puts you in immediate danger. I read the list twice, then a third time. What kind of fire lookout protocols were these? Nothing in my orientation had mentioned anything like this. The rules seemed more suited to a horror movie than a forestry service job. Is this some kind of joke? I muttered, checking the sender address again. It was definitely from the official email I'd been given for Laura. I typed out a quick reply. Received your rules. Are these standard for all lookouts or specific to this tower? I hit send, but the weak signal indicator suggested it might not go through until morning. The notebook I'd found earlier sat in the desk drawer. I pulled it out, suddenly curious to review those paranoid entries in light of these strange rules. The previous lookout had mentioned Laura's rules in one of the later entries. The night had deepened around the tower. Wind whispered through the trees below, making the structure creak and shift beneath me. I flipped through the notebook pages, noticing how the handwriting deteriorated over time. The early entries were methodical observations about weather conditions and potential fire risks. Around day 20, the tone changed. Day 20, Laura sent the rules today. Seems excessive, but I'll play along. Day 23, heard it again last night, the crying. No one should be out here with a baby. I stared at the page, a chill working its way up my spine that had nothing to do with the night air. This person had started rational enough then. A sound cut through my thoughts and the forest silence, a baby crying. The noise came from somewhere below the tower, faint at first, but growing louder. My body reacted before my mind could process it. I was on my feet, grabbing my flashlight, heading toward the stairs. Every instinct I had screamed to investigate. A baby, out here in the wilderness, at night? Impossible, but the crying was unmistakable. I pushed open the door to the observation deck, the metal cold against my palm. The crying grew more distinct, a human sound but wrong somehow, too loud, too clear. It carried through the trees in a way that sound shouldn't. My foot was on the first step down when rule number 2 flashed in my mind. Never leave the tower at night for any reason. I froze, one hand on the railing, the other gripping my flashlight so hard my knuckles turned white. The crying continued, becoming more desperate, more heartbreaking. I swept the flashlight beam across the dark forest below, but the dense trees swallowed the light. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. What if this was exactly what the rules were warning against? The crying intensified, sounding like a baby in pain or extreme distress. Every fiber of my being wanted to rush down those stairs. What kind of person ignores a crying baby? What kind of monstrous protocol would demand that? But something about the sound wasn't right. It seemed to move, first coming from directly below the tower, then from the east, then the north. No parent carrying a child could cover that distance so quickly or silently. I backed away from the stairs, retreating into the observation room. I closed and locked the door behind me, my hands shaking. The crying continued for 10 excruciating minutes. Each wail felt like a physical blow, accusing me of callousness, of failing some fundamental human test of compassion. Then it stopped. The abrupt silence felt almost as wrong as the crying had been. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the chair by the radio, occasionally scanning the dark forest with binoculars, seeing nothing but black shapes of trees against the slightly less black sky. My flashlight and the radio remained within reach at all times. As the hours crawled by, I reread the notebook entries, seeing them with new understanding. The previous lookout hadn't gone crazy from isolation. They'd been documenting exactly what I'd just experienced. Day 26. The crying again. Lasted longer this time. Nearly broke the rule, but remembered what Laura said would happen. Day 31. The suit man was closer today, staring for hours. My skin crawls when he watches. Day 40. Laura's rules aren't enough anymore. Something wants in. I hear them trying at night. The sky gradually lightened from black to deep blue to pale gray. Dawn broke over the forest, revealing nothing unusual below the tower. No footprints, no evidence of anyone having been there. Just trees and undergrowth, peaceful in the morning light. At 6 a.m., I made the scheduled radio check-in. My voice sounded rough from the sleepless night. Bitterroot North to base, morning check-in. The radio crackled before Laura's voice came through. Base to Bitterroot North. Status report? I hesitated, unsure how to explain what had happened. I received your email with the rules. And? Her tone was neutral, giving nothing away. I heard a baby crying in the forest last night, for about 10 minutes. A long pause followed. When Laura spoke again, her voice was tight with tension. Did you follow the rules? Yes, I said. I stayed in the tower. The relief in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. Good. Laura, what's going on here? What was that crying? Why these rules? The radio went silent for several seconds. The rules keep you safe. That's all you need to know for now. But continue regular check-ins and maintain vigilance. Base out. The transmission ended, leaving me with far more questions than answers. I stared out at the peaceful morning forest, trying to reconcile its beauty with the wrongness of what I'd heard in the night. I picked up the blue notebook again, turned to a blank page after the last frantic entry, and began to write my own account. The previous lookout had lasted 43 days, according to my briefing. I wondered how long I would last, and what exactly I was up against. Outside, birds called to each other among the trees. The sun climbed higher, warming the observation room. Everything looked normal in the daylight. But I knew when night came again, I'd be facing something the Forestry Service orientation had never prepared me for. I spent the morning after my encounter with the crying baby trying to establish some kind of normalcy. Sleep had evaded me entirely, leaving me with gritty eyes and a dull headache that coffee barely touched. I went through the motions of my duties, logging weather conditions, scanning the horizon for smoke, checking equipment, hoping routine would ground me in reality. The previous lookout's notebook sat open on my desk. I'd added my own entry, documenting the crying baby in clinical detail as if putting it on paper might make it feel less unsettling. My handwriting looked steady compared to the frantic scrawl of the later entries, but I wondered if that would change over time. Lunch was a simple sandwich eaten at the desk while I studied the forestry maps, memorizing terrain features and landmarks. I needed to be good at this job, my actual job, regardless of whatever else was happening here. The maps became a welcome distraction from thoughts of what might be waiting in the forest when darkness fell again. Around 2 in the afternoon, I took up my binoculars for another scheduled scan of the surrounding area. The day was clear, visibility excellent with a light breeze stirring the treetops. I methodically worked my way around the compass points, checking each section for any sign of smoke or unusual activity. Movement near the base of the tower caught my attention. I adjusted the focus on my binoculars. A man in a brown business suit stood among the pine trees, staring directly up at the observation deck. He was absolutely motionless, like a statue placed in the forest as some kind of bizarre art installation. The suit looked expensive, the kind worn in corporate boardrooms, not wilderness areas. He had no backpack, no water bottle, no hiking gear of any kind. My first instinct was to wave. My hand actually started to rise in automatic greeting before Rule 3 flashed through my mind. If you see someone staring at the tower, do not wave, signal, or acknowledge them in any way. I jerked my hand back down and looked away, my heart suddenly pounding. A man in a business suit, miles from any road or trail, made no sense. The wrongness of it sent a cold trickle down my spine. I forced myself to continue my fire watch duties, checking other sections of forest while fighting the urge to look back at him. The binoculars felt heavy in my hands as I pretended to scan the distant ridgelines. My eyes kept wanting to drift back to where he stood. Was this the suit man the previous lookout had mentioned? The thought made my mouth go dry. I checked my watch, 2:15 p.m. The forest around me seemed unnaturally quiet. No bird calls, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush below, just the occasional creak of the tower in the light breeze and my own breathing, which sounded too loud in my ears. 30 minutes crawled by as I busied myself with logging wind patterns and checking radio equipment. When I couldn't resist any longer, I turned back toward where I'd seen the man. He had moved closer to the tower's base, still wearing the immaculate brown suit, still staring upward with that same fixed gaze. He hadn't shifted his posture or expression, just his location, as if he'd teleported rather than walked through the underbrush that should have snagged and dirtied his clothing. My skin prickled with goosebumps. I looked away again, more quickly this time. I reached for the radio, thought about calling Laura, then hesitated. What would I say? There's a man in a suit staring at me? She'd already sent the rules. She knew what was out here, and I wasn't in any immediate danger as long as I followed those rules. Instead, I grabbed my logbook and began writing down weather conditions with forced precision. Wind speed, 5 to 7 mphe from the southwest. Temperature, 68 degrees. Cloud cover, minimal, scattered cumulus. I documented everything I could think of, filling the page with neat columns of data while painfully aware of the man standing below. The minutes stretched into hours. Every time I gathered the courage to glance down, always briefly, never making eye contact through the binoculars, he was there, never moving, never speaking, just staring up at my position with unblinking attention. At 3:45 p.m., I opened a can of beans and heated them on the small stove, going through the motions of eating an early dinner, though I had no appetite. The food tasted like nothing in my mouth. I kept my back to the windows, focusing on the simple task of eating, washing my dish, wiping down the counter. A metallic clang broke the silence. I froze with the dish towel still in my hand. The sound came again, a deliberate footstep on the metal stairs leading up to the tower. Another step followed, then another. Slow, measured, each one reverberating through the structure. I stood perfectly still, my eyes fixed on the wall in front of me. The footsteps continued climbing. 15 steps, 20, 30. They stopped just below the observation deck, just outside the door. The doorknob didn't turn. No voice called out, just a presence on the other side of the metal door, so tangible I could almost feel it seeping through the cracks. I didn't move, didn't look toward the stairs, didn't make a sound. Minutes crawled by. 5, 10, 15. My legs ached from standing so rigidly. Sweat trickled down my back. After 20 excruciating minutes, the footsteps began again. This time, descending. The same measured pace growing fainter as they reached the lower sections of the staircase. When the forest had been silent for what felt like another eternity, I finally allowed myself to approach the window. My legs felt wooden, reluctant to move. The forest below was empty. No man in a brown suit. No footprints in the dirt around the tower's base. Nothing but trees and shadows. I sank into the chair at the desk, my legs suddenly unable to support me. My hands were shaking as I picked up the blue notebook and opened it to a fresh page. Day 2, I wrote. The suit man came today. I closed the notebook after writing about the suit man, wondering how many more entries I'd make before either understanding what was happening or becoming as frantic as the previous lookout. The pen felt heavy in my hand as I set it down, my fingers stiff from gripping it too tightly. Evening was approaching. The afternoon encounter had left me drained but wired at the same time, caught in that strange limbo where exhaustion meets hypervigilance. I needed to eat something, to maintain some semblance of normal routine, despite the crawling unease that had settled into my bones. I stood up and stretched, my back cracking after hours of tension. The observation room had grown dim as twilight gathered around the tower. I flicked on the overhead light and moved to the small kitchen area, rummaging through cabinets for something simple. My appetite had vanished, but my body needed fuel. I settled on instant rice and a can of chicken. Basic, but sufficient. While waiting for the water to boil on the propane stove, I made another slow circuit of the windows, scanning the forest in all directions. The trees had taken on that soft blue-gray quality of early evening, shadows lengthening and deepening between their trunks. No sign of the suit man. No sign of anything unusual. Maybe that would be it for today. One test passed. I turned back to my dinner preparations, measuring rice into the pot with mechanical precision. A flash of white caught my eye as I stirred. I stopped mid-motion, the spoon hovering over the pot. Something pale moved between the trees about a quarter-mile from the tower. I reduced the flame to a simmer and moved closer to the east-facing window. There, a figure in white, gliding between the pines. No, not gliding, walking, but with an odd, halting gait. It was a woman in a flowing white dress that caught what remained of the daylight, making it seem to glow against the darkening forest backdrop. I squinted, trying to make out details. She appeared to be moving with purpose despite her uneven steps, occasionally stumbling over unseen obstacles in the undergrowth. And she kept looking up, toward the tower, toward me. My binoculars sat on the desk. I grabbed them, adjusting the focus as I trained them on the white figure. She was young, maybe in her 20s, with long dark hair that fell past her shoulders in tangled waves. Her dress, once probably elegant, was now torn and smudged with dirt, as if she'd been wandering the wilderness for days. Her face, even at this distance, showed clear distress. What was a woman in a white dress doing alone in the forest at dusk? The nearest road was miles away. The nearest hiking trail wasn't much closer. And dressed like that? It made no sense. Unless she was the woman in white from the notebook. She stumbled again, catching herself against a tree trunk. My stomach knotted with concern. Nightfall would come soon. The temperature would drop. Mountain predators would become more active. An uneasy feeling told me she wasn't truly in danger, not from the environment anyway. But my instincts screamed to help. I lowered the binoculars and glanced at the radio. Should I call Laura? Report this? But what would I say that wasn't already covered by her rules? The smell of burning rice jerked me back to the stove. I cursed, moving the pot off the burner. The bottom layer had scorched, filling the small room with an acrid smell. I dumped the ruined dinner in the trash and turned off the stove, my appetite now completely gone. When I looked back out the window, the woman had drawn closer. Much closer than should have been possible in the brief moments my attention was diverted. She was maybe 100 yards from the tower now, her progress through the underbrush unnaturally swift for someone who appeared so lost and fragile. Rule 4 echoed in my mind. Do not respond to anyone requesting help or assistance, regardless of how desperate they appear. But she hadn't asked for help. Not yet. I picked up the binoculars again. Through the lenses, I watched her make her way toward the tower with that same stumbling gait that somehow covered ground with unnatural speed. Her face turned upward more frequently now. Her eyes, I could see them clearly despite the fading light, searching the observation deck, looking for me. She knows I'm here, I thought, a chill spreading across my skin despite the warmth of the room. Over the next hour, I watched her approach, unable to tear myself away from the window. The forest darkened around her, but her white dress remained visible, almost luminous in the gathering darkness. Birds had gone silent. No wildlife moved in her path. The normal forest sounds that should accompany dusk were absent, replaced by an expectant hush. When she finally reached the base of the tower, the sun had dipped below the mountains, leaving only a purple smear along the western horizon. She stood directly below, her head tilted back to stare up at the observation deck. At me. I pulled back slightly from the window, though I knew she could see me silhouetted against the light inside. Her mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear. One hand reached upward, palm out, in a universal gesture of pleading. My own hand lifted involuntarily toward the glass, responding to her silent call for help. I caught myself, fingers inches from the window, and forced my arm back down. She continued to mouth words. Help me. Please help. Her expression growing more desperate. She took a step toward the metal staircase that led up to my position. I backed away from the window, heart hammering in my chest. Every natural human instinct urged me to go down those stairs, to help this lost woman, to bring her inside where it was warm and safe. The forest was dangerous at night. She was alone, confused, vulnerable. But those rules existed for a reason. I gripped the edge of the desk so hard my knuckles turned white, anchoring myself in place. The previous lookout had written about Laura's rules not being enough. Had they broken under this same test? Had they gone down those stairs to help someone who appeared to need it? Outside, the woman circled the base of the tower, occasionally reaching toward the stairs, but never actually setting foot on them. Her movements became more agitated as full darkness settled over the forest. She would stop, look up at me with that pleading expression, then continue her circuit. I can't, I whispered to the empty room. I can't help you. For an hour, this strange dance continued, her circling the tower, me watching from above, neither of us breaking the silent stalemate. The longer I observed, the more I noticed subtle wrongness in her movements, the way she sometimes moved too quickly between one point and another, as if skipping frames in a video, the way her dress rippled even when the air was still, the too perfect angle at which she held her head when looking up at me. She wasn't real, couldn't be real, just like the crying baby and the suit man. Around 9 in the evening, she stopped her circling and stood directly below my window again, both arms raised now, reaching toward me in apparent desperation. Her face tilted up, mouth still forming silent pleas. I forced myself to step back from the window, to turn away completely. I sat at the desk, picked up a book, and stared blindly at its pages while counting my breaths. 1, 2, 3. The urge to look back was almost painful. When I finally allowed myself to check the window again an hour later, the forest below was empty. No white dress, no pleading woman, just darkness and trees and the distant call of a night bird that had finally broken the silence. I dropped into the chair by the radio, suddenly exhausted. 3 supernatural entities the notebook had mentioned. I'd now seen 2 of them, the crying baby and the woman in white. Only the hiker remained. I picked up the blue notebook and turned to a new page. Day 2, evening, I wrote. The woman in white came today. Sleep came in broken fragments that night, my body finally collapsing from exhaustion while my mind refused to fully surrender. I spent the dark hours drifting between uneasy dreams and sudden startled waking, convinced I'd heard footsteps or crying or something worse. Each time the tower offered only silence and the occasional creak as it swayed in the night breeze. I got up at dawn, unable to pretend I'd rest any longer. My 3rd day in the tower began with mechanical routine, coffee, weather readings, equipment checks. I wrote everything in the official log with careful precision, as if perfect documentation might somehow protect me from whatever waited in the forest. The normality of these tasks felt like a thin shield, but I clung to it anyway. The sky brightened from gray to blue as I ate a granola bar at my desk, updating my personal entries in the blue notebook. I'd started 2 columns, one for official observations, one for the things that shouldn't exist. The woman in white and the suit man now had their own sections, each cataloged with whatever details I could remember. If I was going to face these things, I would do it methodically. At 8 in the morning, I stood to stretch my legs and scan the forest through my binoculars. The day was clear and still, sunlight streaming through the pine branches. Birds called to each other, and somewhere in the distance a woodpecker drummed against a tree. The forest seemed so normal, so peaceful that I almost convinced myself the events of the previous days had been hallucinations born from isolation. That's when I saw him. A man with a large backpack walked with steady purpose through the trees toward the tower. He wore khaki pants, hiking boots, and a blue jacket, completely normal outdoor gear for the area. His pace was brisk and confident, not stumbling like the woman in white or unnaturally still like the suit man. He looked like any regular hiker who might be traversing the national forest. Rule 5 flashed through my mind. Do not invite anyone into the tower, no matter what they say or how they ask. I watched through the binoculars as he approached. Unlike the suit man, he walked normally, pushing branches aside and stepping over fallen logs. Unlike the woman in white, his movements matched his speed, no jumps or glitches in his motion. He looked completely, convincingly human. When he reached the base of the tower, he paused to look up, shielding his eyes against the morning sun. I pulled back from the window, my heart beating faster. The spiral notebook had mentioned 3 entities. This had to be the 3rd. The metal stairs rang with his footsteps as he began to climb. The sound was different from when the suit man had ascended. These steps had weight to them, a natural rhythm of someone carrying a heavy pack. Hello up there. His voice carried clearly up the stairwell, cheerful and friendly. Anyone home? I remained silent, backing away from the windows and moving to the center of the observation room where I couldn't be seen from below. The footsteps continued up the stairs, steady and purposeful. "Hello," he called again, closer now. "I'm a bit turned around. Could you point me toward the Clearwater Trail?" His voice sounded normal, a middle-aged man, slightly out of breath from climbing stairs with a heavy pack. Exactly what you'd expect from a lost hiker. But Laura's rules had been specific. No exceptions, regardless of how normal or desperate someone might appear. The footsteps stopped at the observation deck. I heard him set down his pack with a thud. "I know someone's in there. I can see the lights on." His tone remained friendly, but with an edge of confusion. "I just need some directions. I think I took a wrong turn at the creek crossing." I stood frozen in the center of the room, hands clenched at my sides. Every social instinct urged me to respond, to help this lost person with basic directions. The silence between us felt wrong, rude, cruel even. "Hello?" he called again, knocking on the door. "Park service? Fire lookout? Anyone?" I remained silent, though it physically hurt not to answer. My throat felt tight with the effort of holding back words. He knocked again, harder this time. "Look, I can see movement in there. I know you're inside. I just need simple directions. What kind of person ignores someone who's lost?" His tone had shifted, frustration edging into his voice. The friendliness was fading, replaced by something harder. "This is ridiculous," he said, voice rising. "I've been hiking for 3 days. My GPS broke yesterday. I'm low on water. All I'm asking for is basic human decency." I moved to the desk and picked up the radio, holding it tightly. I wasn't sure what good it would do. Laura was miles away, and whatever was outside my door wasn't something she could protect me from. But holding it gave me something to focus on besides the guilt and fear churning in my stomach. "Hello? Are you seriously just going to stand in there and ignore me?" His voice had lost all pretense of friendliness now. "What's wrong with you?" The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd taken this job to escape people, to avoid human interaction, and now found myself desperately wishing for any human contact that wasn't whatever stood outside my door. A movement through the east window caught my attention. I turned, still clutching the radio, and saw the woman in white emerging from the trees again. Just like yesterday, her white dress seemed to glow against the dark pines. Her movements that same strange combination of stumbling and too fast progress. "I need water," the hiker said, his voice dropping lower, almost menacing. "Open the door. Now!" The west window showed another figure approaching. The man in a brown suit walking with mechanical precision between the trees. His face remained upturned, fixed on my position with that same unblinking stare that had chilled me to the bone yesterday. They were all coming back, all 3 of them converging on the tower simultaneously. As if confirming my realization, a faint crying sound began somewhere in the forest. The baby again, its wails distant but growing steadily louder. "Open this door!" The hiker pounded now, the metal door rattling in its frame. "I know you hear me! I know you can see me!" I backed away from all windows, retreating to the center of the room again. The crying grew louder, coming from the north side of the forest now. The baby sounded more insistent than before, its cries taking on a desperate edge that clawed at my protective instincts. Through the south window, I watched the woman in white reach the base of the tower. She tilted her head back, eyes finding mine through the glass with eerie precision. Her mouth moved in those same silent pleas from yesterday, hands reaching upward in supplication. The suit man reached the tower moments later, taking up a position opposite the woman. He simply stood, head tilted back, staring with unwavering focus. "Last chance," the hiker called through the door, his voice now cold and threatening. "Open up or I'll break it down." I glanced at the door. It was metal, solid, but the lock was simple, not designed to withstand determined force. The hinges looked sturdy, but not impenetrable. The crying grew impossibly loud, somehow seeming to come from directly beneath the floor. The sound vibrated through the tower structure, making it hard to think, hard to focus on anything but the primal need to help a child in distress. I needed to secure the door better. My eyes darted around the room, looking for anything I could use as a barricade. The desk was too heavy to move quickly. The bed was against the wrong wall. The small kitchen chair, that would work. I grabbed it and wedged it under the doorknob, angling it to brace against the floor. It wouldn't stop a determined assault, but it might buy me time. The pounding at the door increased, each impact sending vibrations through the metal. The hinges groaned slightly under the force. "I'll give you to the count of 10, the hiker shouted, his voice twisted with rage now, nothing like the friendly tone he'd started with. 1, 2. I grabbed my duffel bag and shoved it against the bottom of the door, creating another small barrier. Then I backed away, radio still clutched in my hand, though I hadn't tried to use it. What would I say? That I was being attacked by things that shouldn't exist. 3, 4, 5. The crying had grown so loud it seemed impossible it came from a single infant. It sounded like it was coming from inside the tower itself, from every direction at once. Through the windows, I could see the woman in white, and the suit man had begun to move in slow circles around the tower's base, like predators waiting for their prey to weaken. They moved in perfect synchronization, maintaining exact opposite positions as they circled. Their heads remained tilted back, eyes fixed on me. 6, 7. I pressed myself against the far wall, as distant from the door as possible in the small space. My breathing came in short gasps. The radio was slick with sweat in my palm. 8, 9. The tower seemed to vibrate with the combined assault. The pounding at the door, the crying that filled every corner of my mind, the oppressive weight of being watched by those unblinking eyes circling below. 10. Something hit the door hard enough to dent the metal slightly inward. The chair legs scraped against the floor but held their position. Another impact followed, then another. The metal groaning under forces no human hiker should be able to generate. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, knees pulled to my chest. The radio pressed against my ear, though it broadcast nothing but static. The crying had reached a pitch that made my ears hurt. A sound of such raw distress that every cell in my body screamed to respond. Through the windows, I watched the circling figures below move faster, their orbits tightening as they drew closer to the stairs. The woman's white dress fluttered with unnatural motion. The suit man's precise movements never faltered. Another crash against the door. The chair shifted but didn't fall. Time lost meaning as the assault continued. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, though my watch told me only 45 minutes had passed since the hiker had first appeared. The pounding at the door came in waves, intense, violent barrages, followed by eerie silence that somehow felt even worse. The crying never stopped. The circling figures never rested. "You can't stay in there forever," the hiker called during one of the quieter moments, his voice unnervingly calm again. "Eventually you'll need to come out. Eventually you'll make a mistake, and we'll be waiting. We, not I. We." The three of them were working together, coordinating their assault, testing me, testing the rules. Another hour crawled by. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting shorter shadows through the windows. The beautiful day outside formed a surreal backdrop to the nightmare unfolding around me. At precisely 11 in the morning, everything stopped. The crying cut off mid-wail, leaving a ringing silence. The pounding at the door ceased. I waited, hardly daring to breathe, for some new form of torment to begin. But the silence stretched on, broken only by the gentle creaking of the tower in the breeze. Cautiously, I pulled myself up from the floor, legs stiff from sitting in the same position for hours. My hand was cramped around the radio, and I had to consciously relax my fingers to set it down. I approached the nearest window with tentative steps and looked down. The forest below was empty. No woman in white. No man in a brown suit. The staircase, visible from my angle, showed no sign of the threatening hiker. All three had vanished as completely as if they'd never been there at all. I spent the next hour systematically checking every window, confirming that the entities had truly gone. The forest had returned to normal. Birds sang, squirrels chattered, and a gentle breeze stirred the pine branches. Nothing stared at the tower. Nothing circled its base. Nothing cried out for help that couldn't be given. When I was certain the immediate danger had passed, I carefully removed the chair from under the doorknob and examined the door itself. The metal was dented in several places, warped from impacts no human could have produced. The evidence of what had happened was right there in bent metal and twisted hinges. This hadn't been a hallucination or a dream. I picked up the radio and called Laura. "Bitterroot North Tower to base, come in," I said, my voice rough from hours of silence and stress. "Base here," Laura replied almost immediately. "Status report." My voice caught and I had to clear my throat before continuing. "I'm alive. All three of them came today. Together. The suit man and the woman from yesterday, plus a hiker on the stairs. They surrounded the tower for over 3 hours." Laura was silent for so long I thought the connection had dropped. "You followed the rules?" she finally asked. "Yes. I didn't acknowledge any of them. Didn't respond. Didn't leave the tower. Didn't let anyone in." Another long silence. "The tests come in waves," she said finally, her voice holding a note I hadn't heard before. Something like respect or perhaps relief. "You passed the first round by following the rules exactly. Most people don't." I sank into the chair by the desk, suddenly exhausted. "The previous lookout lasted 43 days before breaking Rule 2, she finished for me. "Went down to investigate something at night. Never returned. We found the tower empty the next morning, the door standing open." My mouth went dry. "How long do I need to stay here? How long does this go on?" Laura's response came after a measured pause. "Until you can't anymore, or until something changes." "That's not an answer," I said, frustration momentarily overriding my exhaustion. "It's the only one I have," she replied. "Maintain your scheduled check-ins. Keep following the rules. You're doing well." The radio clicked as she ended the transmission. I sat in silence for several minutes, processing everything that had happened. The job description had mentioned isolation, fire spotting, weather monitoring. Nothing about supernatural entities testing my resolve or sanity. Nothing about rules that meant life or death. I picked up the blue spiral notebook and turned to a new page. Under my previous entries about the crying baby, the suit man, and the woman in white, I wrote, Day 3. The hiker came today. Then all three came together. The tests come in waves, Laura says. This isn't about watching for fires. It's about surviving something that calls this forest home. I closed the notebook and looked out at the peaceful afternoon forest, knowing that the peace was temporary. They would be back, and next time they might try something new. I set the radio down after Laura's cryptic response, her words echoing in my empty tower. Until you can't anymore, or until something changes. What kind of answer was that? The kind that made my stomach turn to ice. That's what. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, turning the observation room golden and peaceful. It was hard to reconcile this warm, quiet space with the nightmare that had unfolded just hours earlier. I got up and walked a slow circuit around the room, examining the dented metal door, the chair I'd used as a barricade, the windows through which I'd watched those things circle below like vultures. My legs felt rubbery, the delayed reaction to hours of adrenaline finally hitting me. I sank onto the edge of the bed, head in my hands, Construction work had never prepared me for this kind of stress. Getting laid off suddenly seemed like a blessing compared to whatever hellish job I'd actually signed up for. I took a few deep breaths, trying to center myself. I needed a plan. If this was my reality now, supernatural entities testing me, trying to make me break the rules, I had to adapt, survive. I'd always been good at adapting. First things first, secure the tower better. The chair under the doorknob had worked today, but barely. What else could I use? I glanced around the small space, taking inventory. The desk was too heavy to move quickly, but maybe I could shift it closer to the door for future emergencies. The bed frame might be dismantled for parts. The shelves contained potential tools. I spent the next hour improvising additional security measures. I fashioned a more stable door brace using the chair and some rope I found in one of the storage compartments, creating a tension system that would be harder to dislodge with external force. I moved the heavier furniture to create a more defensible space. I took stock of everything that could serve as a weapon or barrier. Not that physical defenses would necessarily work against whatever these things were. They had vanished without a trace, after all. But doing something, anything, helped me feel less helpless. When I finished, I stood back and surveyed my work. The observation room looked different now, less like a cozy forest outpost and more like a fortress. The sight should have been depressing, but I felt a grim satisfaction instead. I was adapting, surviving. My stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten since that granola bar at dawn. I made myself a late lunch, canned soup heated over the propane stove, and ate standing up, looking out at the forest that now seemed both beautiful and malevolent. The trees swayed gently in the afternoon breeze, birds flitted between branches, and somewhere a woodpecker resumed its rhythmic drumming, nature continuing as if nothing had happened. As I washed my bowl in the small sink, I tried to make sense of it all. What were these entities? Why were they testing me? And what did Laura know that she wasn't telling me? The blue notebook sat on the desk where I'd left it, my latest entry staring back at me. I sat down and reread what I'd written earlier. Day 3. The hiker came today. Then all 3 came together. The tests come in waves, Laura says. This isn't about watching for fires. It's about surviving something that calls this forest home. I turned to a fresh page and began writing again, trying to organize my thoughts. Day 3, afternoon. I've survived the first wave of tests. Laura said most people don't. I need to understand what I'm dealing with. I flipped back through the notebook, rereading the previous Lookouts entries more carefully now. Their early entries had been methodical, professional, weather conditions, fire risk assessments, wildlife sightings, normal lookout stuff. The change had come around day 20, when they first received Laura's rules. I studied their handwriting, noting how it gradually transformed from neat, measured script to increasingly frantic scrawls. The progression told its own story. Confusion giving way to fear, fear to paranoia, paranoia to desperation. By the final entries, the pen had dug so deeply into the paper that it tore through in places. Could that be me in 40 days? The thought made me shiver despite the warm afternoon air. I turned back to my fresh page and continued writing. What I know? 1-3 entities test the lookout. Crying baby, woman in white, man in suit. 2, they each try different approaches to make me break the rules. 3, they can work independently or together. 4, they leave no physical evidence behind. 5, this has happened before, many times, based on Laura's reaction. 6, the previous lookout broke after 43 days. I tapped my pen against the page, thinking. There had to be patterns, weaknesses, something I could use. The Forest Service wouldn't keep sending people up here just to disappear. There had to be a purpose. Laura had said I was doing well. That suggested success was possible. I added another line. 7, they operate on some kind of schedule or pattern, coordinated attacks, specific timing. The sudden cessation at exactly 11 a.m. hadn't seemed random. The precision suggested rules or limitations the entities themselves had to follow. Maybe there were more patterns I could identify if I paid closer attention. I spent another hour making detailed notes about each entity, their appearances, behaviors, methods of approach. The more I wrote, the more I felt a thin sense of control returning. Knowledge was power, even incomplete knowledge. As evening approached, I found myself dreading nightfall. Would they come back? Start another test? My hands shook slightly as I prepared a simple dinner, rice with canned beans and hot sauce. I ate mechanically, not tasting the food, eyes constantly scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. The setting sun painted the forest in fire colors, orange and red light spilling between the trees. Under different circumstances, I might have found it beautiful. Now, the lengthening shadows only heightened my anxiety. I completed my official lookout duties with forced focus, logging weather conditions, scanning for smoke, my actual job, ironically, checking equipment. The routine tasks anchored me somewhat, reminding me that beyond the supernatural horror show, I still had responsibilities. At 7 in the evening, I made my scheduled radio check-in with base. Laura answered immediately. "Status report," she said, her voice professional and controlled as always. "All quiet since this morning," I replied. "No signs of smoke or fire. Weather conditions stable. No visitors." There was a pause before she spoke again. "Good. Keep to the routine. Maintain vigilance." I wanted to ask her more questions about the entities, about previous lookouts, about how long this had been happening, but something in her tone stopped me. She had already told me all she was willing to share, for now at least. "Roger that," I said instead. "Next check-in at 0600 tomorrow." "Confirmed. Base out." As darkness claimed the forest, I secured the tower for the night, checking my improvised barricade, closing the storm shutters on 2 of the 4 sides to create at least some sense of privacy, keeping my flashlight within reach. I left lights on in the observation room, unwilling to sit in darkness with my thoughts. Sleep seemed impossible, but my body had other ideas. The stress and adrenaline crash of the day caught up with me as I sat at the desk reviewing my notes. My eyes grew heavy, my thoughts foggy. I jerked awake twice from micro-sleeps before finally admitting defeat. I moved to the bed, not bothering to undress beyond kicking off my boots. I lay on top of the covers, flashlight beside me, listening to the night sounds of the forest filtered through the tower walls. The distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of wind through pine needles, the occasional crack of a branch. Normal sounds, natural sounds. Nothing crying, nothing circling, nothing knocking. My last conscious thought before exhaustion claimed me was a question. If this was only the first wave of tests, what would come next? I woke suddenly in pitch darkness. The light I'd left on was off. Something had changed in the room. A shift in the air pressure, a new presence. My heart instantly accelerated as I froze, straining to hear over the blood rushing in my ears. A soft scratching sound came from the window nearest the bed. Not the random tap of a branch or bug. This was deliberate, methodical. 3 slow scrapes. Pause. 3 more. I didn't move, didn't breathe. My fingers found the flashlight beside me, but I didn't turn it on. Light would only confirm what I already sensed. Something was at the window, watching, waiting. The scratching stopped. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then, so quiet I almost missed it, a voice whispered against the glass. "Let me in." The words slithered into the room like cold smoke. Not the hiker's voice, not a child's cry. Something new. "I know you're awake," it whispered. "I can help you. Let me in." I kept absolutely still, eyes fixed on the ceiling I couldn't see in the darkness. The voice didn't sound like any of the 3 entities I'd encountered. It was neither male nor female, neither young nor old, a voice stripped of identifying characteristics, leaving only intent. "They're coming back tomorrow," the voice continued, a little louder now. "All of them. More. Worse. I can tell you how to survive. Let me in." My mind raced. This had to be another test, a new variation, a different approach. Rule 5. Do not invite anyone into the tower, no matter what they say or how they ask. "They've taken others before," the voice said, dropping to a near whisper again. "Dozens. Hundreds over the years. This tower has stood for so long, watching them disappear. You don't have to be next. Let me in." I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to respond, to ask questions, to seek answers that might help me survive. This thing, whatever it was, played on a different fear, not my compassion or social obligation, but my desire for knowledge, for advantage against the threats I faced. The scratching resumed, moving slowly around the perimeter of the window, the sound of something testing the glass, looking for weakness. "She won't tell you everything," the voice said. "Laura. She can't. She's bound by rules too, but I can tell you what you need to know. Just 3 words, 3 little words. Let me in." I squeezed my eyes shut, focusing on my breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth, slow and steady. This would pass. This had to pass. "They're getting stronger," the voice continued, now moving to a different window. "The longer you resist, the hungrier they get." "Did she tell you that part? Did she mention what happens when they finally break through?" A new sound joined the scratching, a light tapping like fingernails against glass. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. 43 days, the voice mused. That's how long the last one lasted. But the one before that? 39. Before that, 51. They're learning, adapting, just like you're trying to do. It's a game of pattern recognition, isn't it? Both sides learning the rules. Both sides finding the loopholes. The tapping moved to yet another window, circling the tower just as the entities had circled below. "I'm offering you an advantage," it said, the voice now directly above me, somehow speaking from the ceiling. "Knowledge they don't want you to have. Safety they can't provide. All you have to do is invite me in. One time. One exception to the rules." I reached for the radio on the bedside table, intending to call Laura, to report this new development. My fingers found empty space. The radio was gone. "Looking for this?" the voice asked, now impossibly close to my ear. I jerked upright, fumbling for the flashlight. This time I switched it on, the beam cutting through the darkness to reveal nothing. An empty room. The radio sat on the desk where I'd left it, not on the bedside table where I thought it had been. The windows were clear. No figure stood outside, no hands pressed against the glass. But as I swept the flashlight beam around the room, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The door was ajar, just a crack, but enough to see it had been opened from the inside. I lunged from the bed, crossing the room in 2 strides, and slammed the door shut. I wedged the chair back under the doorknob, securing it with shaking hands. "Smart," the voice said from directly behind me. "But not smart enough." I spun around, flashlight beam cutting wildly through the room. Empty. Completely empty. But the voice had been right there, close enough that I should have felt breath on my neck. "Rules only work when both sides agree to play by them," the voice said, now from the center of the room. "They've agreed. For now. But what happens when they change the game?" I backed against the door, flashlight beam steady now as I systematically checked every corner, every shadow. Nothing moved. Nothing hid. The room was as empty as it should be. "Think about it," the voice said, fading now, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. "I'll be back when you're ready to hear the truth. When you're ready to survive." The last word lingered, stretched, then dissolved into silence. The darkness felt suddenly lighter, the air clearer, as if a pressure had lifted. Whatever presence had filled the room was gone. I stood against the door for what felt like hours, flashlight still raised, breathing hard. When I finally convinced myself I was alone again, I checked my watch. 3:17 in the morning, the darkest part of the night. I moved cautiously to the desk and picked up the radio, checking that it still worked. The indicator light glowed green. Functional. I considered calling Laura, but stopped myself. What would I say? That a voice had spoken to me in the dark? That it had offered me information in exchange for breaking the rules? She would only tell me what I already knew. Follow the rules, no exceptions. Instead, I turned on every light in the observation room, chasing shadows from every corner. I checked the door again, confirming it was securely locked. I examined the windows, finding no scratch marks, no evidence of anything having been there. Sleep was out of the question now. I sat at the desk and opened the blue notebook to a new page. Day 3, night, I wrote, my handwriting steadier than I felt. Something new came, not the 3 from before. A voice offering help, information, safety, tried to get me to break Rule 5. I paused, pen hovering over the paper. There was something else, something the voice had said that bothered me beyond the obvious threat. I wrote it down. It claimed the entities are getting stronger, hungrier. It said they're learning the patterns, adapting their approach. It talked about previous lookouts as if there have been many over a long time. What exactly is this tower watching? I closed the notebook and stared out at the night-dark forest. Dawn was still hours away. I would stay awake until then, lights blazing, watching the tree line for any movement. Tomorrow would bring new tests, the voice had promised. All of them, more, worse. I ran a hand over my face, feeling the stubble that had grown over the past few days. I hadn't thought to pack a razor. Somehow, personal grooming had seemed unimportant for a job watching for forest fires in total isolation. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had sought isolation, and now I was trapped in it, surrounded by things that wanted in. The rest of the night passed in tense vigilance. I alternated between watching the forest, reviewing my notes, and checking and rechecking the door. By the time the eastern sky began to lighten, my eyes burned with fatigue. But I felt a grim satisfaction at having survived another night without breaking the rules. As the first gray light of dawn filtered through the trees, I made coffee on the propane stove and stood by the east window, watching darkness retreat. The forest emerged from shadow, trees taking shape, details resolving, the world becoming solid and real again. No figures stood below. No one circled the tower, no baby cried in the distance, just trees and morning birds and the promise of another day. But the voice's warning echoed in my mind. They're coming back tomorrow. All of them. More. Worse. I set my coffee down and picked up the radio for my 6 a.m. check-in. Laura answered after the first call. Base here, status report. Bitterroot North Tower reporting, I said, voice rough from lack of sleep. No fire activity. Weather clear. I hesitated, then added. Something new came in the night. A voice, offering help if I'd let it in. Laura's silence lasted so long I thought she might not respond. You followed the rules? She finally asked, her tone carefully neutral. Yes, I didn't invite it in, didn't respond at all. Another long pause. Good, she said. That's unusual this early. The voice typically doesn't come until after the first week. My grip tightened on the radio. So you know about it? Yes. Her reply was clipped, reluctant. It's part of the pattern, another test. It said they're getting stronger, learning, adapting. Is that true? The silence stretched again before she answered. They test the rules, find the edges, look for weaknesses, both in the rules and in the people following them. What happens if they find a weakness in the rules themselves? That's not your concern, Laura said, her tone sharpening. Focus on following them exactly. That's all you need to do. I wanted to press further, to demand more answers, but she continued before I could speak. Another supply drop is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Northeast corner of the clearing, usual time. Do you need anything specific? The abrupt change of subject was obvious, but I recognized the futility of pushing. Fresh batteries for the flashlight, more coffee, a stronger door lock if possible. Noted. Maintain your regular check-ins. Base out. The radio went silent, leaving me alone with more questions than answers. I put the radio down and turned to face the new day, mentally preparing for whatever was coming. All of them. More. Worse. I opened the blue notebook again and made a new entry. Day 4 begins. The voice that came in the night is part of the pattern, according to Laura. She knows about it, but won't explain further. Supply drop tomorrow. If the voice was telling the truth, today will bring a stronger test. I need to be ready. I closed the notebook, finished my coffee, and began preparing for the day ahead. Whatever was coming, I would face it with open eyes and firm.